It's a remarkable thing to think about, but when you really boil it down, Lincoln was faced with an almost insurmountable task, and he just was not going to put mediocre people in positions of authority. And I think this also says something about his security. I mean, I've been in corporate America and in local government for many, on and off for years, and it's amazing how many leaders will surround themselves with yes people who don't want to hear somebody say something negative. Lincoln wasn't that way. He really, in fact, wanted to hear what people said. And tell you a little bit more about how he worked with people. In his cabinet, they found Lincoln to be amazingly decisive, very strong decisively. And I don't mean a guy issuing orders all the time, but a guy willing to make decisions and listen to everybody else. And I heard a story today about Gerald Ford was the same way. He would listen to everybody, and then he would say, well, okay, great, I've heard you out. This is what we're going to do now. That's kind of the way Lincoln was. Now, I cannot tell you any stories about what's going to happen with Barack Obama and his new Secretary of State, but I think it might be interesting. I can tell you some stories about what happened with Lincoln and Seward. And now, Seward was the man, and he really thought he should be president. I mean, he was going to be president, that was it. So when he becomes Secretary of State, he sends an emissary down to South Carolina to negotiate a peace treaty with the South so that the Confederacy and the Union could coexist. And he didn't tell Lincoln about it. And Lincoln basically found out about it, and he called Seward into his office at the White House and shut the door, and it was just the two of them. And he said, look, he said, you can't do this. We're going to preserve the Union. And then he really chewed him out. He said, you will not act on my authority again without consulting me. Don't ever do that again. And so that was the end of it. And I thought that was interesting. He didn't chew him out in front of other people, but he made his point. And then Seward was feeling kind of bad, and then he decides, well, how am I going to work? And how am I going to get done what I want to get done? And he basically begins to watch Lincoln, and he sees that Lincoln likes to work with a team and build consensus, and so he gets this other idea, and then he goes around to all of the other cabinet secretaries, and he builds support from the other cabinet secretaries for this new idea that he's going to introduce at a cabinet meeting. And the only person that didn't know what was coming was the president. So he's assured that they're all going to support him, and he goes in there, and he says, this is my idea, and Lincoln listens. He says, all right, what's the idea? He says, well, Mr. President, I think we should start a war with Great Britain. And that way we will unite the North and the South against a common enemy. And Lincoln, the story goes, he kind of leans back, thinks about it a minute, looks at Seward and says, one war at a time, Mr. Secretary? And what do you think all of the other secretaries in the room said? They didn't say anything. They basically left Seward out there to kind of dangle, And, okay, so now you have your right-hand man, put yourself in the position of these two people. Seward is the Secretary of State. And you're Seward, and now you've been chewed out in private by the President and embarrassed by the President in front of your colleagues. What are you going to do? He submitted his resignation. And now what are you going to do if you're Lincoln? Lincoln, basically, you got your right-hand man who is going around behind your back trying to usurp your authority, and then he's also working behind his back with the other members of your team. What are most corporate executives going to do with a guy like Seward? They're going to fire him, right? Now, this is one of the things that I find set Lincoln apart from a lot of other leaders, and that is he did not accept Seward's resignation, and he did not fire Seward. He chose instead, bless you, he chose instead to build a relationship with William Seward. And over the next 6 months, he would take these long carriage rides with Seward, invite him to go with him out to talk to the troops out in Virginia when they were coming down for their training. And he would go to lunch with them and go to dinner, and they would get to know each other. And he built a relationship with Seward. And he told John Hay, he says, if I can just get Seward to come over to our side, I'll never have to worry about the State Department again. And 6 months later, Seward would write to his wife, executive force and vigor are rare qualities. The President is the best of us. And I often found this to be very interesting. What did he say? He said, the president is the best of us. It wasn't about you or me. It was about the country. It was about us doing the best job for the country. And Seward later became Lincoln's strongest supporter and best friend for the rest of the presidency. So I ask you the question, was it worth it to take the time to build that relationship for 6 months? And how many leaders would have really done that? So we know he was interested in building alliances. He was a major part of his leadership style. And today, people write about alliance building, and why you should do it. And this is from a recent couple of books that I pulled out that people are teaching about leadership now. And, the banding together of individuals creates energy and enthusiasm, and you can get more work done, and you can leverage resources and all of that. Well, Lincoln was doing this in the Civil War, All you have to do is study him. And in his famous 1858 House Divided speech when he was running for the Senate, he started out with a quote from the scripture, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." But then he pointed out something that I found was really remarkable about his leadership style. He said, "Our cause must be entrusted to and conducted by its own undoubted friends, whose hands are free, whose hearts are in the work, who do care for the result." So he wanted people on his team who cared. And how do you ever really know if somebody cares? Now, I've been there, and you point people and you think that they care, but how do you ever really know? Well, you have to build relationships with them. You have to be sure. And how do you build relationships with people? You don't do it by staying in your office all the time. And one of the things I found about Lincoln, that he was just always out of the White House. I had real trouble tracking him down. I had to go to this publication, Lincoln Day by Day, just to find out where he was. And he was always going out in the field, talking to people and convening cabinet meetings at odd places and things like that. And his philosophy was, it's important that the people know I come among them without fear. Because he was the president, he did not want people to fear that, which I think is very interesting. And he even fired one general because he stayed in his office all the time. That was General John Fremont, who was the head of the Department of the West in Missouri, and he was staying in his office and he was issuing all of these crazy orders, and people said, well, this is ridiculous, and so they wouldn't follow his orders, and they started laughing at him and they mocked him. And then they got mad, and who did they get mad at? They got mad at Lincoln for leaving Fremont in the position in the first place. Finally, Lincoln removed him from office, and he wrote a letter to David Hunter, who was Fremont's replacement, and he said this of Fremont. He said, his cardinal mistake is that he isolates himself and allows nobody to see him, and by which he does not know what is going on in the very matter he's dealing with. What a remarkable statement. That's his philosophy. But not only that, but he wrote it to Hunter because he didn't want Hunter to make the same mistake. I used to think about Lincoln a lot, and I said, whenever you see pictures of Lincoln, he never has a briefcase. So he's always traveling, and where does he keep his papers and stuff, right? And so the story goes that that they wrote the story that his top hat was his portable desk, and he would take. Here he is at Antietam with McClellan, and he'd take his hat off, and he'd pull letters and pens and pencils and money and rabbit, out of his hat. And then I saw this hat on the lower right. This is one of the hats, probably the main hat that Lincoln wore during the Civil War. I saw this in California at a museum. And you see the two white spots right there? That's where Lincoln put his fingers when he was taking his hat off and putting it on. And he wore it down to the felt. And that was very moving to me because that showed how often he was traveling with that same hat. One of the things that historians, one of the reasons that they rank Lincoln the greatest is because the greatest president is because of all the innovations. Here's a picture of a hot air balloon. In the Civil War was the first time hot air balloons were used to kind of get the lay of the land. It's kind of a 1860s U-2 plane, I guess. But Lincoln was very interested in technology. He's the only president to have ever held a patent. And this is it. It was for a method of making grounded boats more buoyant. It never sold anything, and it never made him any money. And you can go to the patent office today and see it. But I always thought, well, this is how his mind worked. He was interested in this type of stuff. And he did do new things.